Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Saurabh Ubaveja, and on behalf of Confederation of Indian Industry, I welcome each one of you to the curtain raiser on A to Z of brand management for your business, which is a precursor to the online masterclasses by CII on brand management. Thank you very much for joining today. So, what we're going to do today is we have about 60 minutes in which I would introduce you to this series of masterclasses. And while I introduce you, I would also maybe give a little bit of introduction to what really brands are, why are we doing this in the first place, where is branding really in the country today, as a nation, as in our country, India, where are we really at the moment? How far have we achieved? And while we do that, we will also try to build a little bit of context for what you can expect in the next couple of masterclasses. Thank you, Mr. Rao, for your kind introduction. So, I don't really have to go through this slide once again since it's been well introduced, and I will go straight away to the agenda. So, we have five main things to cover. Like I said, what are brands? Why branding? Branding in the Indian context, the top branding challenges faced by Indian companies, and finally, a little bit about the CII online masterclasses on brand management. So, what exactly are brands? I would really go back a little bit in history just to take you back. You know why is this subject so important today? But then, where did it really start? Now there are different kinds of history to this. If you really ask me, I would say branding is as old as universe, probably a couple of million years old. But then what everything has been documented really well, a lot of people do believe that branding as a terminology, as a concept, as a word really began from a Norse or a Nordic word called brandar, meaning to burn. When you say to burn, essentially it was used to identify cattle. We are talking about a society, an agrarian society, where cattle were absolutely critical to the livelihood for people, and it became a challenge to identify them and also to save them from getting stolen. So, this is really where you can say the formal definition of the word brand really came from. But if you really ask me, is this old enough? I don't really think so, because the oldest generic brand actually belongs to India. It is in continuous use in India. When I say the oldest generic brand, I say this because it still exists today. There are many brands before that, after that, died down, but something which has remained. And this is a very interesting word when I say generic brand. And as we move forward, you will understand why I say this. Now, this is a brand which started from Vedic period, which is before Christ era, and it is a herbal paste known as Chyawanprash. It was consumed for purported health benefits, and it was actually named after a famous rishi called Chyawan. And the product was actually discovered or developed by those in an extinct volcano in northern India. The interesting part is Chyawan to Chyawanprash as a concept was brilliantly masterminded by one of the most iconic Chyawanprash brands in India called Dabur. And today they have multiple variants, right from the mixed fruit to sugar free for people who have diabetes or who would want to control or manage their diabetes yet enjoy the benefits of.
Chyawanprash as a product. An interesting thing happened. Patanjali Maharishi, who happens to be the founder of the most authoritative, ancient, legitimate system of yoga. Today, yoga is practiced in many parts of the world, but it is said that it actually all began there because while yoga itself is known to have been practiced by Shiva, but then Patanjali Maharishi was the one who actually put it down on some text, on some readable stuff in terms of proper guidelines. It was called as the Ashtanga Yoga. And today we have a very interesting brand I would say it could be easily put into the category of a generic brand, but it has very smartly been created as a brand which many people experience today in their homes, is a brand which is creating a lot of waves today in the country. It has beaten a lot of national and international brands in market share very quickly, and it is growing quite fast. So the Patanjali brand is what I'm talking about. But interestingly, they also have a Chyawanprash. Now, if you really ask me, Patanjali cannot really be owned by anyone as a concept. It is a yoga system. Chyawanprash, technically speaking, again cannot be owned by anyone. It is again a product which was created by Rishi Chyawan. But today we have brands in India which are getting created using the Indian historical and probably one of the biggest traditions or knowledges which have been actually stored and are now getting uncovered in various forms. So you can really see the power of branding. I mean, if I really look at the history, it's quite interesting, quite exciting. But then, why is branding so important today? Why are we talking about the A to Z of brand management? What is it that you're going to learn that's going to transform the way you manage your business, the way you run your business? And it's very important to understand the why behind it before we really get into the specifics. So, if I were to really tell you what is branding, branding simply defined is the process of adding value. Now, value addition can actually happen at multiple levels. It could be right through the customer journey, but it typically starts with your inputs. Now, when I say inputs, it could be the thinking behind the management. It could be the raw materials that you use in your product. Now, I also consider people as inputs today because a lot of businesses today are actually based around human resources and not just the natural resources that we keep talking about in terms of the coal or etc. But the issue with this is that while we are talking about branding as a process of adding value, we also need to understand that a simple way of understanding branding is that it is the exact opposite of commoditization. Now, commodities are actually easy to sell because they actually don't need selling if you think about it. I mean, how much effort does it take to sell water? It is a necessity. I need it, so I'm going to buy it. Whether it comes in my house as a tap water or if I believe more in the bottled water, but the fact remains that it is a commodity. Yeah. There's not too much really selling required. Now, generally speaking, the prices of commodities get fixed and they're a pretty much known fact to the consumer. There's not too much that the consumer can think about when it comes to commodities. So it's like saying when you go and buy fuel today for your car, be it petrol or diesel, to a large extent, the price does get fixed. So the question to ask is Indian Oil a brand? Is BPCL a brand? Of course, the answer is yes. By selling commodities, they can still be brands. So then what do I really mean when I say branding is the exact opposite of commoditization? Let's look at a small chart. If you see it's a double arrowed horizontal line that I've created. On the right hand side is what you see as branding. On the left hand side is what you see as commoditization. Since I just told you a basic definition of branding, the process of the journey of value creation. So let us assume for a moment that as you move more towards the right, you're getting into this journey of value creation. But as you move towards the left, it's really the journey of value destruction. Now, I'm not talking about price or cost here. I'm talking about value. I'm talking about the value or the perception that a consumer puts in his mind about your product, about your brand. Now, unfortunately, many industries that we belong to are close to the left side. So if you see that marker, why I'm showing it a little bit to the left, because the majority of industries in India, majority of companies in India struggle to get onto the right side, and they really are on the left hand side. Now, when you go more and more towards the left, something happens. and what I call is cost consciousness, purely from the perspective of the consumer. So if I'm a consumer, if I'm buying a commodity, I'm more concerned about how much am I going to pay for this, not really concerned about how much value am I going to get out of it. But as I move towards the right, the consciousness on cost keeps reducing. And along with that, the value of money also keeps reducing. So for something where a brand where I can put the marker right till the end, I can actually say that in a lot of cases, I'm not even bothered about as a consumer how much I'm paying for this particular brand because I have such strong associations with it. I relate to the story and the vision behind the brand that money ceases to become that important. Easier said than done, but at least from a theoretical point of view, from a conceptual point of view, this marker and this slider will really help you understand what I mean when I say that branding is the exact opposite of commoditization. The next slide should make this clearer. What you see on the x axis is branding, and what you see on the y axis is commoditization. And I have two markers on an inverted line. Yeah. The inverted graph that you see here actually pretty much sums it up. So as you go further to the right and lower on the vertical axis, you realize that you're becoming more and more of a brand. And as you go higher up the vertical axis and to the left, you realize that you're less and less of a brand. Now, I put up two country flags here just to give you an indicative understanding of how nation brands are perceived, how India as a nation brand is perceived, and how Germany as a nation brand is perceived. Now, in the end, if you ask me what is nation brand or what is nation branding, it is nothing but the sum total of all the brands which actually exist in a nation. So if you really add them up, while 2 plus 2 is not always equal to 4, but if there was a technical way to add everything up, all the constituents that make India as a country, all those constituents are also brands in some way. But it would be safe to say that the majority of them are actually perceived as commodities or generic brands or branded generics, as we often say. So, be it the IT services, we're not the most expensive. We're pretty much perceived as the coders, not really the consultants. Be it the pharmaceutical medicines, we are known more for the generics, not so much for research. Though it's not to say that it's not changing. It is, the change is happening at a pretty fast pace. But then at the same time, research and development, innovation are not things which India as a nation brand is really known for, and which apparently become the key essentials if you really want to move towards the right and down in the vertical axis. So, the question really to ask yourself as a business owner, as part of the top management, as a brand manager, as a corporate communication manager, even as a brand consultant, if you're listening to this, the question you need to ask yourself is, are you getting commoditized with every passing year? Now, the interesting thing about commoditization is that it's a natural process. And to really identify if you're getting commoditized as if it was some kind of a disease, I'm going to share some symptoms with you. The first and foremost symptom that you often come across, if I were to diagnose you with this problem called commoditization, is that you're unable to increase prices, whereas input costs continue to rise, putting an ever growing pressure on your margins. Your customers are always negotiating with you on price. So it always boils down to what is it that you're going to pay me or what is it that you're going to charge me. Now, you don't want to get into that cycle, but it becomes an unavoidable cycle, and you get to be known as somebody who's just going to offer a Me Too product with no clear distinctions, and let's just talk about the price. Now, there's something very interesting about commoditization. In a recessionary environment, now recessions happen. It's not something that never happen. It happens in every country, in every part of the world. But whenever there is a recessionary environment, it could be because of multiple reasons. If you are a commodity, or if you're closer on the left axis towards becoming a commodity on the slider, you're the first one to lose market share. Now, this can be quite striking, and I want you to observe it in your business. Are you amongst the first ones to lose market share in a recessionary environment? Everybody loses market share, but you're amongst the first ones. And suddenly, when there is a market boom because the cycle really changes, and when your sales increase, while you might keep thinking that, hey, my business is doing really well, but it could be because the market is generally booming, you find that your market share is coming down while the sales are increasing, but as a percentage of the total market, your market share is coming down. And some of the competitors who probably are more towards branding and less towards commoditization seem to be increasing their market share with the sales increase. And if you're really trying to get an order, either you're the lowest priced, or you have to offer hidden incentives, which nobody really likes in the business, but it becomes a necessary evil. And every time you want to increase your sales, you have to offer discounts, special offers, schemes, all these kind of words that you typically listen to are not something that you wish to give, but you have to give because you have to get rid of your inventory and you have to increase your sales as time passes on. Now, if you face majority or some or even one of these symptoms, chances are that you're really on a momentum of commoditization, and which could be extremely risky for your sustainability going forward. What I mean to really say here is that even if you sit idle, and let us say you're perceived as a brand today, and you want to stay with that thought for the next couple of years, you need to understand that even the value creation process, even once you've created value, you've created brand value, and you don't do anything about it after that, the process of commoditization is pretty natural. You cannot reverse it by sitting idle. It is an old saying, only dead fish go with the flow. So you don't want to become a dead fish. You want to actually reverse this process, and you want to get into this cycle where you're always moving to the right of the slider, and you want your marker always be towards branding rather than commoditization. With that as a background, and knowing that India really is a country where we haven't unfortunately created enough number of global brands per se, we do have a lot of Indian origin brands for Indian consumers. But if you really sit down and count, you can actually not count more than 10 to 15 brands in India which are truly global. Whereas we do have access to a lot of global brands, probably more than 5,000 at any point in time. Probably you never counted, but if you look at your typical day, right from the toothpaste that you use, to the face wash that you use in the night, everything seems to be coming from outside India in a way. It might get manufactured in India, but these brands were not really created in India. Well, that's still not something which is a sweeping statement in a lot of ways, but it is fairly largely true when it comes to the majority of brands which we get exposed to. So, what really is the Indian branding industry? So, traditionally, it's been dominated by large Indian conglomerates and multinationals. This is how brands used to get created. Either a large multinational would enter India and they would actually get their brands from Europe, from Japan, from USA, and then they would adapt them for the Indian market. I mean, the needs are pretty much the same across the world. They would simply bring them to India and adapt them in many cases, even if they set up factories and supply chains within the country. By looking at them, a lot of Indian conglomerates, Indian companies who had the money to invest into creating brands, took some great ideas from the multinationals and also created their brands. But it was almost impossible traditionally for a small company to emerge as a brand, as advertising was the only way known at that time to build a brand, and that was pretty expensive. Even today, I often use this saying that advertising is somewhat of a lazy and an expensive way of building a brand. You do that when you have absolutely no other ways out. It's not to say that advertising is non essential, but using it for the right purpose, for the right benefit, is something which very few brands learn in their life cycle of building a brand. And if you don't have enough money to advertise, today at least, it does not mean that you can't build a brand. So traditionally, while it was expensive, it was still a lot more easier. Now that's the paradox. It was expensive, not to say that it was cheap, but then it was also not so difficult to create a brand because you had far lesser number of brands in the market. You didn't have so many brands to compete with. So even if you were the first one or the second one or the third one in the industry, you would still have some market share. Maybe the market itself was not growing as fast as it is today, but at least existing in people's mind, creating brand value or being perceived for something was comparatively easier as compared to today when there is a lot of clutter in everybody's mind. And part of that clutter is largely created by the social media, the omnipresent social media, which is constantly throwing messages at you and leaving absolutely no space in the mind for a brand to position itself. So, then why is branding so important in India today? One of the interesting changes that you see here is that the Indian consumer, because of two reasons, has become better exposed. One, they've been exposed to better brands in India. And because of a lot of traveling that Indians do today, they've been exposed to a lot of high quality brands outside India. But even if an Indian has not traveled outside India today, there is still sufficient exposure on the internet. And because of that exposure, what has happened is that consumer expectations are constantly rising. So if you're a brand which is trying to meet consumer needs, consumer expectations, by the time you meet them, suddenly consumers have new needs and new expectations. And there is always this constant hustle that you're running all the time to try and meet, forget beating expectations. And as a result of which, consumers constantly want more value for their buck. So, what could be bought in 100 rupees earlier is no longer valuable enough. They need more value for that same 100 rupees. Another interesting trend why branding is suddenly becoming so important in India today is the rise of entrepreneurship. Now, entrepreneurship in India is at the moment at a pace which was never seen probably in the last 200 years. It is not only driven by the need to earn more money, but also to create more value. Entrepreneurs want to create large organizations, they want to create brands, they want to create brand value, and they also want to create an image in the society. Now, when I say entrepreneurs, I don't necessarily only mean the first generation entrepreneurs as you see today creating the new age tech startups. But what I also mean is a second generation entrepreneur, a third generation entrepreneur, a fourth generation entrepreneur who probably is looking at their own business in a very, very different way. The entrepreneur has been exposed to the best global education. The entrepreneur has been exposed to the best global brands. He or she buys those brands, experiences those brands, and sees the huge gap and opportunity that the Indian market offers today for the creation of brands and moving consumers away from commodities towards more branded products. While it is comparatively cheaper to create brands today, and one can argue how, it could be a discussion we could have maybe in the next couple of master classes, but it is a lot more difficult. So cheap doesn't always mean easy, and expensive doesn't always means, yeah. So it is a lot more difficult as there is stiff competition all around for every product and service. So if today you want to create a brand for any product category, it's not to say that you cannot, but when you do it, you're likely to find a lot of competitors already in the market. So then, what really are the emerging trends? So what is really happening in the Indian market that probably you need to look at? One of the most interesting trends that we see, as an economy, we were always the manufacturers. The service economy became more prominent after the 80s, especially with the IT and tech companies coming into action. Of course, the hotels have always been around. Healthcare is becoming more and more prominent as a service category, service industry. But then the manufacturers and exporters who actually created a lot of jobs after independence have suddenly become tired of doing it for other brands. And this is a trend I see more and more frequently as I meet a lot of entrepreneurs. They want to create their own brands. So imagine a textile manufacturer who's been creating for some of the largest global fashion brands like a Zara or an H&M. The manufacturing is happening in India. The quality is of completely world class, all the latest machines, sometimes even using robots. Yeah. And they're all international quality exports. But then suddenly that entrepreneur, probably now in the second and the third generation, feels that if I can create it for them, why can't I create it for myself? The second interesting thing that's happened with increasing globalization is that Indian entrepreneurs or importers have access to the finest products made anywhere in the world. So that dependency that you only need to have products made in India is no longer the case. So importers have access to the finest products and they wish to launch them as brands. An interesting case in point here is a lot of the new mobile phone brands, the smartphone brands that you've actually seen getting created in India. It's actually happening quite a bit in the consumer electronics space, be it televisions, be it smartphones. If you think of brands like a Micromax, it first got created by actually importing high quality phones from China. And then only later on, they actually decided to have their own manufacturing. So what is really interesting here is that you're no longer dependent on that you have to create your product in your own factory. That possibility creates a lot of many possibilities as far as branding is concerned. So if I want to create an absolutely state of the art haute couture luxury footwear brand manufactured in Italy, it is possible today. I can just go to the best factories in Italy, import the footwear, put my stamp, and make it available to the Indian customer and say that this is a brand that I've created. Probably the made in Italy also only adds to the fashion sense of it and is a big positive as far as fashion is concerned. Another interesting trend that I see in India is that distributors who were traditionally serving the large multinational brands and the Indian brands have learned to access the markets. They actually have access to the markets. Some of these distributors have become so large. They started small, but they become large. They earn a lot of money. They control the market. That they today want to actually leverage their access to the market to launch their own brands in these markets. And that has created a lot of opportunities for them, something which did not exist traditionally. One of the most interesting trends that I observe going forward is that a lot of large multinationals, when I say multinationals, not just multinationals created outside India, but a lot of multinationals which are now based in India, they've been actually Indian origin to a large extent, are looking to innovate. They're not just creating brands first made for USA and then launching in India, or first made in Germany, then launched across the world and then launched in India, or first made in Japan, then launched in USA and then in India. But they're actually looking to innovate and create brands specific to Indian needs first. That means you first come to India, get access to the market, create the finest brand possible for the Indian market, and then later take it to global markets. Now, this is a trend which I see changing, something which never existed in the Indian market. Earlier, what happened, probably about 30 to 40 years back, was there a global brand which wanted to access the Indian market. simply brought a global brand from outside, hired an Indian marketing manager or a brand manager, and adapted it to Indian requirements. So it was more of adaptation. So the creation of the brand itself was not inspired from the Indian customer. Now, adapting something and creating something, there's generally a huge difference in quality and needs. Yeah. And the other interesting thing which I see as an emerging trend is that Indian origin brands are now being designed in a way that they can actually become global brands. Now, this is something which is a change, not just because probably we see that as a possibility today, but the Indian entrepreneur today, be it the first generation or a fourth generation entrepreneur, is increasingly more ambitious. The Indian entrepreneur has a lot more confidence. The Indian entrepreneur today feels that they can take on the world. Why should I just create a brand for Orissa or for Uttar Pradesh? Why not for the whole of the country? And then why not for the whole world? While there is merit in it, it is important to understand that creating global brands is not an easy job. It requires a lot of simplification. It requires a very structured approach to branding. But the good thing is that there is sufficient ambition to trigger that. One of the other interesting trends which I see is the merger of consumer technology. So, on one hand, you've got consumer industries, what you sometimes call as the B2C industries. Yeah. And then there is a merger with technology in a very, very interesting fusion to create a totally new set of industries which earlier did not even exist. You call them health tech. So if you search health tech in Google, you will get a lot of companies, a lot of startups, a lot of large companies investing in health tech. Think of education tech or ed tech. Food tech. Now, when did food become technical? We thought we only ate food. But the interesting trend is that there is an interesting fusion of technology with the way food is being delivered today. And even entertainment tech. So, what's really happening is that technology is playing an increasingly important role in creating automation. Now, what does automation do for the branding industry? It's actually quite interesting. If I were to tell you one of the biggest objectives of branding is that it needs to build a very high amount of predictability in the way goods and services or products and services are delivered. Now, this predictability in turn creates trust. And in the end, we all know the end objective of branding is to create trust. Now, what technology does to these industries is it adds a very high level of predictability. So, when you talk about health tech, for example, if today I can book an appointment with a top doctor in a top hospital, sitting on my mobile app or the computer on the web at the comfort of my home, and I know exactly at what time my appointment is. That means I don't really have to sit in queues, register at the hospital beforehand, and waste a lot of time doing that. It changes the game. It suddenly creates a lot of automation. It adds a lot of predictability in the way I experience brands. And it also creates a lot of possibilities to create global brands because technology nobody really owns. Everybody has access to it. Yeah. Then the other interesting thing which has happened, which has actually made a lot of entrepreneurs quite excited about the possibility of creating brands, is the rise and prominence of e-commerce marketplaces. We all know everything about the Amazons of the world, the Flipkart, the Snapdeals, and then social media, be it Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or any of the other new age social media channels that you come across. The rise and prominence of the e-commerce marketplace and social media has done something amazing. It has given the Indian entrepreneur an opportunity to create and test launch their brands with ease. Earlier, they had to depend on creating a distribution network, doing their own marketing. Reaching out to the market was a pretty expensive process. Traveling was not easy. Logistics was not as sorted as it is right now. And because of the marketplaces, the online marketplaces, and the communication marketplaces like social media, the entrepreneurs are able to quickly launch a product or a branded product and then put it on the marketplace for sale. At least it gives you an initial response of whether customers are liking your product or not. Does that really create your brand? I'm not quite sure. Because the way most of these marketplaces sell your product or your branded product is certainly not on the principles of brand building. So, which is why you also see a totally new trend which is emerging after trying out the marketplaces. So, brands, especially the new age startups, they would first launch a brand on the marketplace and then they would take it out, take it away, and launch their own branded websites or branded portals. A trend which is gaining a lot of prominence of late, especially with consumer brands. Now, when I say marketplaces, I mean both B2C and B2B. In fact, the B2B marketplace approach probably has a much, much bigger potential as compared to the B2C marketplace approach. But having said that, the question that you need to keep asking yourself, which I asked you at the start of this presentation, was: are you getting commoditized year on year, or are you becoming a brand year on year? If you can keep that question at the top of your discussion board, at the top of all your board meetings, it will certainly tell you a lot about how you're building your organization and how you're building your brand. Now, having seen the trends, if I were to really share with you what are the top branding challenges being faced by Indian companies today, it would be the following. And actually, I could spend probably 2 hours only talking about a fragmented approach to branding. The first challenge that you see on the list. What exactly do I mean when I say fragmented approach to branding or brand building? Well, it goes like this. Sometimes companies look at branding from the perspective of, hey, I need to create some great print ads or print campaigns. Sometimes companies look at their website and say that, hey, my website looks very outdated. I think it's time to change it. Sometimes they just look at their catalog and have a look and say, hey, I don't think this catalog serves the purpose. Recently, I saw some great catalogs in an exhibition in Germany, and I've got some samples. So, can we also change our catalog? Sometimes it's based on personal experiences while you're trying to access a service. So, if you're a hospital and you visited a top hospital and you're amazed at the ease of service or the quality of the service you've received, you suddenly want to introduce it in your hospital because you think it works really well. So, the service experience. But the problem with this approach is that it's a hit and trial approach. Sometimes people come and say, hey, I'm starting something new. I need a brand name. I need a logo. Now when you're trying to approach branding in a way that you're only trying to solve a very small problem and not really a structured way to build your brand, the chances are you're working on a hit and trial method. And your chances of success as a business, whether you're established or you're just starting out, will keep on reducing with time. And whether you like it or not, you will blame the process of branding, or you will blame the consultant, or you'll blame the designer who created something for you. But the problem lies in the brand definition itself. And this is where it brings me to my next big branding challenge, which I want to speak about. Is an ambiguous or a weak positioning, a weak brand positioning. What is a weak brand positioning? When it is not focused enough, when it is not clear, when it is not defined and written down, or even if it is written down, it is so ambiguous. For example, a restaurant that says that my restaurant is famous for Chinese food, it is also famous for Italian food, and by the way, you can also have dal makhni and butter chicken. Now, that's an example of a weak or an ambiguous brand positioning. It is practically not possible for that restaurant to be the best in all of these. So he has to make a choice. The restaurant has to make a choice. Does it want to be known for a big menu? Does it want to be known for a particular service experience? Does it want to be known for a particular product? Does it want to be known for a particular cuisine? Does it want to be known for the nature of the service. Is it fast food, or is it something which is, fine dining? So positioning is something which almost all brands in the country today struggle with. And it happens also because you might start with a firm and a focused positioning, but as you scale up your business, as you get more and more opportunities, for a businessman, for an entrepreneur, for marketing managers, when you step out, you see that there's so many opportunities outside, and you practically want to have a hold over majority of them. That's when you start to hurt your positioning, the original positioning. It has happened with so many brands over the years. The third challenge, like I spoke to you about, is the commodity nature of the product. So here I'm not talking commoditization as a process, but the fact that the nature of the product that you're selling is perceived as a commodity by default. For example, if you're in the dry fruits business, whatever you do, if you're selling cashews, whether you sell them in the most high quality branded packets or you sell them in a plain polythene unbranded pack, there is not too much premium you can expect because people perceive a cashew nut or an almond as a commodity. There's not too much you can do over there. So that's one of the challenges which Indian companies face. And that's just one example of a product. There's so many other products like steel, products like software development, products like healthcare services. Sometimes people perceive that this is a given, there's nothing special in it. So the commodity nature of the product itself makes it a little bit difficult to create a brand. The next challenge, which I often encounter, is the difficulty in scaling up the business. And that usually happens when your brand definition is restrictive. That means your brand does not allow you to scale up. Now, it is both a challenge and an opportunity, something which I will share in the next couple of masterclasses, because while focus creates a lot of attention on your brand, but at the same time, sometimes focus also becomes the Achilles heel, and you're not really able to scale up your business in the way that you really wish to. So, striking the right balance is never easy. For example, I would not use a face wash from a brand which I use for cleaning my teeth. It is that difficult to scale up. While both of them are cleaning agents, one for cleaning teeth and another for cleaning my face, but then I would not use the same brand for doing that. At the same time, as you scale up, as you become bigger, you come across more and more possibilities as an entrepreneur, as a marketing manager, you enter new markets. Your brand architecture keeps getting more and more complicated, especially because of over diversified businesses. Even in the same business, you end up launching so many products, sometimes products which don't even speak to each other, but they're still part of your portfolio. They also become a primary cause for dilution of brand equity. So, deciding which brands to kill, where to create a brand, where are the possibilities of brand extension, how do I scale up this brand, how do I leverage this brand to create another brand, and how do I sometimes create new brands which should actually not have anything to do with the old brands. These decisions are not easy. There is not just opportunity in scaling up your brand, there is also a huge risk that you run of killing your old brand. And therefore, the last challenge, the inability to exploit the true potential of brands and branding, becomes another big challenge. You've created a massive brand, a very powerful brand, sometimes because of the legacy, sometimes because of the number of years you've spent, sometimes because of all the good things that I shared with you, which are necessary to create a brand. You've done that, but you're not able to monetize. You feel you're a very big brand, you feel that people trust you, but you still don't know how to make money out of it. The monetization part becomes a challenge. And that usually happens when we start to believe that branding as a process is limited to advertising alone. And of course, before I forget, the challenge of competing with global brands in India and outside India. We must recognize the fact that we're increasingly in a market which is largely globalized, largely. All international investors are just out there in India today. Every brand which is famous wants to look at the Indian market. So if you're in India, if you're the brand manager, if you're an entrepreneur trying to create a brand inside India, you must be aware that the competition is going to be increasingly stiff. So, what are you doing towards it? And if you really ask me what is the root cause for these challenges, somewhere down the line, as Indians, and I'm also an Indian, so pretty much includes me, the root cause is that branding is often perceived as a tool to increase sales. That means when we look at branding, we only look at it from the perspective that we have to monetize it. That means it must result into something which is immediately tangible, something which is short term, something which is transactional, rather than perceiving it as an asset that enhances value and delivers sustainable ROI or return on investment. In fact, there is one masterclass in the series which is completely around understanding brand as an asset and more than 8 ways of how you can actually monetize the brand asset to get an ROI. But you only do that if you actually understand the value of brands as an asset. It might be intangible, but it can be one of those assets in your balance sheet which are constantly appreciating in value, unlike machines, which over a period of time depreciate. So it is very, very important to understand the principle of branding from the balance sheet point of view rather than the P&L point of view. While P&L is very, very important when it comes to brand monetization, and I shared with you a lot of Indian origin brands sometimes even struggle to monetize, but the majority of them actually only monetize and never end up creating brand value. As an example, let us say an Indian company with a turnover of 500 crores thinks that it is doing something great, but it might simply be selling a commodity or a branded commodity as best. If suddenly, because of some reason, that company has to actually sell off that company to another buyer, the company which is having a turnover of 500 crores actually cannot demand a great value for that company because everybody believes that what it's selling is a commodity. There's nothing special in the brand. There's no value to it. Maybe the value of the company is just 50 crores. Turnover is 500 crores, but the value of the company is just 50 crores. It's quite possible. Yeah. On the other hand, you could have a scenario where you have a company with a turnover of just 100 crores, but an overall brand value or an enterprise value for that matter of 2000 crores. So those are the possibilities we are talking about when you suddenly look at your brand as an asset rather than something which is just going to affect your P&L. The possibilities are immense when you think of it like an asset. Now, coming to the online masterclasses that CI has proposed on the A to Z of brand management. So, what does it really entail? What I gave you was like a very, very high level introduction about branding, brand management, the possibilities, the current state of the Indian brand industry, where Indian brands are at the moment, what are the opportunities, what are the trends. But what would really happen in the master classes is that you would actually end up learning the key skills. And while you're learning those skills, you would also be able to apply them to your business. While it is not an exercise which would completely transform your brand, but it's certainly something which will start at least trigger important discussions in the boardroom, important discussions during brainstorming, when you're creating your brands, when you're building your brands, and probably try and put branding at the center of all important decisions. So if you were to ask me who should be attending these masterclasses, I would say certainly entrepreneurs. So all the people who've actually created their companies should be most concerned about brand as an asset because their balance sheet is very, very important. At the same time, it is absolutely critical to involve the top management, the CXOs, not just the CEO, even the CFOs. Because if you're talking the balance sheet, the CFO would be very, very interested. How does branding affect his balance sheet? Not to say that you don't need the CMOs and the corporate communication directors. So pretty much all CXOs would benefit from the masterclass. by learning some of the most powerful principles behind brands. Brand and marketing managers, I would say, would be highly benefited. For them, it would be not just a review of what they probably learned, probably in their MBAs, but would certainly give them a very different perspective of looking at brands. Because sometimes in our MBAs, and I'm an MBA too, what we learn is how to only manage brands. We don't often learn how brands are created in the first place. And of course, the students of brand management. And last but not the least, there could be a lot of brand consultants or professionals who are working with marketing firms, advertising agencies, design agencies, experience design agencies, would also benefit immensely by learning the principles of branding. It is suitable for professionals from all industries. So it's not just for, sometimes it is perceived that branding is only for consumer businesses or FMCG kind of businesses. But in my experience, having worked with over 300 brands, 60% of the time we've worked with B2B companies. It is amazing how branding can change the value of B2B brands. Such a powerful tool. So it doesn't matter whether you're B2B or B2C, it doesn't matter whether you're a product or a service, it doesn't matter whatever the nature of your business. You can benefit from the masterclasses. So finally, what you can expect to learn. I think this is important. The primary reason why you should be attending these masterclasses. First and foremost, you learn how brands are created in the first place. Then you learn the role and importance of branding for your business. That means from your point of view, as an organization, as a brand manager, as an entrepreneur, as a CEO, how is branding or how can branding affect your business in a positive way? You will also learn the complexities of a company's positioning. I mean, positioning is something which got introduced as a word in the dictionary a couple of decades ago, but it's still not understood in the right way. Probably the biggest deficiency or lacuna or a challenge which most brands face is that they're not able to get their positioning right, which becomes the root cause of almost all problems. Then you will learn and examine all aspects of brand creation. What is it that really entails brand creation? You will learn the application of the concepts of brand building and management. You will determine the strategic contribution that brands and products make to a company's growth and sustainability. And finally, a lot of best practices in brand management from some of the top brands which have got created till date. So, some key topics that you can expect in this series, which would be announced by Mr. Rao very soon, is introduction to brands and understanding the differences between branding, marketing, and selling. Yes, they're very different. In fact, branding and marketing sometimes have no link to each other, which very often we feel that they're the same. Very often times I hear people saying that marketing is a part of branding and branding is a part of marketing. But then it is important to understand the concepts in isolation before you create a bridge between them. Similarly, selling is something again which is totally different. Once you understand that difference, you become an efficient brand. You understand how you want to play the game of branding to grow your business and also earn more money. Another key topic that you can expect in the masterclass is learning how to create, store, and use brand equity to grow your business. Now, this basic principle itself is so powerful, and if you learn it, it changes the way you look at your organization. It changes the way you run your business. So, the creation, storage, and monetization of brand equity. Then you learn how to align your business to your brand, which in turn results into a lot of cost savings, not just increase in revenue, but a lot of cost savings. In fact, the highest ROI, which we often hear from companies who've learned how to create brands, is in saving costs, not increase in revenues. Increase in revenues is certainly a byproduct. Multiplication of profits would certainly happen. You will also learn how to build a strong brand foundation based on principles of brand strategy and brand identity. You will understand the positioning and the importance of getting it right. Understanding the difference between positioning and messaging, which itself is a huge gap area, like I shared with you earlier. If you are already a big brand, you will learn how scaling up and extending your brand puts across amazing opportunities in front of you, but also the challenges and pitfalls and the risks of scaling your brand that come with it. You will also learn how to map your customer journey and create experiences that build a wow brand, something which I shared with you all customers have begun to expect. And not to forget brand communication. You will learn the rules of brand communication and how to get it right. And how can I forget digital? Digital today is omnipresent, like I said. And if you don't learn how to use it in your brand building journey, or if I were to say use it in the right word, where to use it, how to use it, what to do with it, is something which would be very, very beneficial for your business. And I would cap it with the branding secrets from the world's most powerful brands. What are the world's most powerful brands doing every day that you could learn in your business to become a strong brand? So if you're interested in the online masterclasses, your contact point is Mr. B.S. Rao and Mr. Ashok Sajwan. Their email IDs are published here. I believe you're already in touch with them as you registered for the classes. And before we go to the Q&A, just a quote for you. Remember, if you often find yourself bargaining with your customers, you haven't become a brand yet. It's a question that should always stay with you. And if it stays with you, you will keep thinking about whether you're a brand or not. So thank you very much. And we can now open this to the Q&A session.